Okay, I think let's get going. People can still join in, but the first part is saying good morning and welcoming everybody back. This morning we have the child development session, and my co-chair on this session is Wiedaad Slemming. So I'll hand over to Wiedaad just now, but I just wanted to tell everybody that this is actually an exciting session in the sense that it's a collaboration between two different conferences. Last week there was the International Developmental Pediatrics conference in Johannesburg. So there were lots of people from all over the world at this international conference. And so this conference today, so we have brought one session as a summary, because we are aware that not everybody was actually able to, or many people from this group, from our audience here, were not able to join the IDPA. But we brought some highlights for you as delegates, and yeah, so that's where this session fits in, and it's extremely topical for us, as you will all know, I'm sure. So I'm handing over to Wiedaad to start with the first part of this exciting session. Thank you, Wiedaad. Over to you.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. So as Uta said, South Africa had the privilege of hosting the 5th International Developmental Pediatrics Association, or IDPA Congress, in Johannesburg last year. Last week. It's not quite last year yet, but several of us were on the local organizing committee, and Professor Kirsty Donald, who you may know, is a neurodevelopmental pediatrician at UCT and the deputy director of the Neurosciences Institute at UCT. And she was the Congress chair, and several of us were on the local organizing committee, so we're involved in the conference as well. And we're very happy that Kirsty has agreed after a grueling, I think, more than a year of planning, but also a grueling week last week, to come and join us today to just share some of the updates, what's hot, you know, what's new from what came out of the Congress. And as Uta said, there were lovely presentations, lots of new scientific thinking and challenging of assumptions and thinking around child development that, yeah, we can all learn from. So Kirsty, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Uta, Wiedaad, and your committee for inviting this session into your meeting. As you know, this group is feels like it's preaching to the choir. We all believe that that child development is an intimate part of child health, and so and seeing children thrive includes understanding how they can best develop. So today I'm not going to try and condense 4 days into 15 minutes, but I am going to give you a couple of key insights which I think came out of the meeting for me. So with that, let me have the $1 million question and see if my screen share is going to work nicely. Yes, let's hang on a moment and just try this again. That's looking promising.
Yeah, it's coming.
Right. We're on the summary slide, so
yeah,
let's go like that. Are we good?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. She's passed the first test. Okay. So here we are. Highlights from the Developmental Pediatrics meeting from last week. I think the first thing to say is that for me, there were a number of different threads, but the ones which I feel which I'm going to highlight here are trying to understanding or communicating why it's important to be looking at children, looking at very young children, trying to put a spotlight on factors which are relevant to majority world countries or countries who have more limited financial resources anyway, or economic resources, in terms of understanding what are the risks to optimal child development, and what are the things that support child development. Obviously, it's relevant to think about the universal factors, of which there are many, but particularly to understand what is it about our environment that can help or hinder child development, and keeping that lens. The other key thing which came out for me is, in all our work, in all our clinical work and in all our research work, the importance of keeping the child at the center, the child and the family at the center of everything that we do. The third factor, or the third thread, which I think was really important, that came out for me, was the recognition of doing measurement in culturally and environmentally appropriate ways, doing things using tools that are valid in our environment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the GSED. And then finally, recognizing the huge call to action around being able to identify, or putting systems in place to be able to identify children who have developmental conditions or developmental difficulties, and including them in every aspect of life. So from the periphery to the mainstream was the call to action. So I'm going to cover a few of those things today. So this we have covered. A little reminder, and I think this audience probably doesn't need this as a reminder, but just a point. This is a slide representing electrification across the world. Now, ESCOM aside, what you can see is that the African region is extremely under-electrified, and I think this is represents the kind of economic center of gravity of the world in many different respects. And it's a reminder of the fact that our environments are very different from places where most of the research and most of our guidance around child development, tools for child development, are derived. And just to bear that in mind front and center in everything that we do, in terms of our interpretation of what we do, and in terms of our focus of where we put our energy in trying to understand what's important for child development and how we look at it. So why is it important to look at early life? We build our brains as we grow. So there is important foundational potential in every single human being, but that is impacted on by our environment, and that in turn impacts the structural development, and building on that, the functional development. And this is an iterative process, so that environment impacts the brain, and the brain impacts how a child behaves and how they interact with their family and their environment, which in turn has an impact on what other exposures they might have. And so you can see it as a kind of layered and complex iterative process that happens critically, or that where a lot of this kind of critical early development happens before birth and in the first couple of years of life. So this is the sort of underlying biological underpinnings which has informed some of the work around the first 1,000 days program. To build this, to give you a bit more of an idea of what this means in terms of the sort of functional windows, is that what you can see is that there are certain things which have peak periods of development in this time. And so if we take something really concrete, like your visual development, this happens, in fact, mostly after birth, because in utero one has very little visual stimulation. But it means that your visual pathways are developing very rapidly in the first months of life, and they can be, and that also offers a kind of window for understanding what impacts brain maturation in that area, but also the functional maturation. Hearing, on the other hand, starts developing in utero, and children hear their mother's voice, they hear things going on in the environment, muted they may be, but when children are born, they already have an ear for their mothers. They obviously have a sense of smell, which is very tied to their mother, and so there's you can see that there are different windows for where these kind of peaks of development may happen in this early period. Why is this important? It helps us to understand to some extent when the child may be most vulnerable to exposures that may impact these areas of development, both in terms of risk, but also in terms of protective factors. And so understanding which windows are most important for particular areas can help us both target or strategize around targeted interventions that may feed into being able to support these areas, but also allow us to most meaningfully measure, if we make an intervention, on whether it's having an impact. Again, this is a representation of how factors may impact a child at a discrete period. So, for example, if we look at prenatal alcohol exposure, obviously the direct impact of alcohol is most likely to be happening in utero, and the direct biological effect, but obviously there are broader psychosocial and nutritional impacts of a mum who may use alcohol during the early postnatal period, which may still have an impact on the child, but it's slightly different. HIV exposure, likewise, the kind of biological impacts of the HIV exposure or immune regulation is most likely to be having its impact in utero, but obviously the broader impact of that environment of having a family where chronic illness may be in the picture is obviously something which may impact the child later. Violence exposure may be a chronic exposure, or it may be something that a child is exposed to in a very discrete way at a specific time. And you can see that these factors may even co-occur. Nutrition is something which can occur. Nutritional exposure in terms of deprivation can occur over time, or it can occur during acute periods of deprivation. And so you can see these factors can interact with each other during particular windows, but also across time, making this a very, very complex area to understand, but nevertheless important. So why are children so important? So obviously we've understood that we've looked at why looking at the developing brain and the developing function of children in very early life is important from a scientific perspective. But what about the scale of the problem? So, and these are slides you may have seen before, in that in Africa is one of the regions which has the most rapidly growing demographic. And what this means is that we have a young population. If population projections play out as they are right now, by 2050, of Africa's projected 2.9 billion population, 1 billion will be children under 18, which means approximately 35%. And by 2100, we will host 49% of the world's children. And what does this mean? It means that we need to understand what's important for children here because this is where it's going to matter most for our world's future. Alongside these kind of broader public health approaches, we also need to understand that Africa has a disproportionate burden of neurodevelopmental conditions, and that is obviously underpinned by many of these risk factors, which put children at risk of secondary causes. So moving on to how we measure this, how do we measure this? We can observe behavior, we can look at development, and we can measure the brain directly. And so increasingly,
have we lost Kirsty?
and which literally can be put into the MCIS cluster surveys, and can measure children for on track, off track, which is a sort of population level thing. The GSED is much more refined and can give us a much more kind of defined picture of how a child's development is progressing. We also increasingly have other scalable tools, including low field neuroimaging and low density EEG, which can also help us in a more affordable way understand what is happening at the underlying neurobiological level. The GSED directly taps into understanding the impact of interventions that are being rolled out globally for the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular trying to measure the impact of programs pitched at the nurturing, at supporting the nurturing care framework for children under 3. I'm not going to go into this in a huge amount of detail, but to recognize that measurement tools need to operate in different areas. They need to be able to understand at population level whether there's a population level monitoring. They need to understand at a more refined level the impact of evaluations. At a research level, we need to understand mechanisms and also the impact of interventions at a more neurobiological measure. And we also need tools that are able to identify individual children who have developmental differences that need support. So suffice to say, the GSED is the WHO tool that's been developed around measuring child development in a culturally appropriate and valid way. It's finishing its validation stage now and is increasingly widely available. I know that I'm short of time. I'm going to move on. And I think, and I just wanted to also mention that the Global Report on Children with Disabilities was launched in our region during the conference, and please all take a read. This is about putting children with developmental differences front and center with a human rights-based approach. We've talked about this, and the thing that I'm going to end on was Friday was World AIDS Day, and Professor Mina Abubakar spoke about the scale of successes that we've had in ending AIDS, but all the work that we still have to do. And next up, Catherine Wedderburn is going to talk to you a little bit about the growing impact of children who are HIV exposed but uninfected. So just a reminder that these factors are complex, and you'll hear more about that in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsty, for a comprehensive overview. As you can see, there was lots happening at the IDPA, and I think Kirsty gave us some of the key highlights. So thank you very much, Kirsty. As she said, Dr. Catherine Wedderburn, also from the Neuroscience Institute at UCT, will now continue with her presentation on HIV and child development. Where are we now?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, and we can see your slides. Go ahead, Catherine.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for having me to present here. and I will be presenting on HIV exposure and child development, following on from Kirsty's presentation. Where are we now? So I just wanted to start by thinking about this population. So this is a graph in millions of children from the year 2000 to 2020. And what you can see in the red line is children living with HIV. And this population has remained relatively stable and has decreased slightly in recent years. And this is the prevalence, so that means the incidence has decreased, and this is thanks to the amazing success in preventing vertical transmission of HIV due to the introduction of antiretroviral therapy. But we still have this ongoing high antenatal HIV prevalence, and this has led to this growing population of children who are HIV exposed and uninfected, estimated at 16 million worldwide. As Kirsty said, I'm going to focus my talk on this population, but I do want to highlight that children living with HIV are an extremely vulnerable population with ongoing neurocognitive impairment documented, and really strikingly low levels of viral suppression in this population. So we do need to do more with that population to improve their outcomes. But looking at children who are HIV exposed uninfected, these are the countries with the highest prevalence. And what you can see is the top countries, over 1 in 4 children are born HIV exposed uninfected. And in South Africa here, this amounts to over 4 million children. So any impact on their neurodevelopment and growth outcomes will impact not at just an individual level, but also at a population level. But what do we mean when we speak about children who are HIV exposed, uninfected? This is a very nice figure by Amy Slowgrove. And what we can see is that it's a package of risk factors, which includes exposure to HIV, exposure to antiretroviral therapy in pregnancy, but then it's also associated with poorer breastfeeding, maternal morbidity and mortality, and then socioeconomic factors associated with being born into an HIV-affected household. So I'm going to start by just looking at growth, and there are many studies of growth in this population in the early years. And this is one from Stanley LaRue and team in Guguletu. And what you can see is the red line is HIV-exposed children and the blue is unexposed. And you can see that HIV-exposed children have significantly lower Z scores compared to unexposed children by 1 year of life. And this is a similar study, but done in Zimbabwe by Kerry Evans and team. And you can see they actually have lower Z scores overall, but again, significantly lower in exposed uninfected children. And they also have increased rates of stunting. And this is interesting because we know that stunting and poorer height are linked to neurocognitive outcomes. But just before moving on, I wanted to highlight a study done by Ute's group, which also looks at growth outcomes. And here in black, you can see HIV unexposed, and this is HIV exposed uninfected. But then you can see the combination of HIV unexposed and placental insufficiency and HIV exposed and placental insufficiency kind of going across to the right. And what I want to highlight is that when they looked at growth in these children, we see it's actually the combination of HIV exposure and placental insufficiency that really leads to the poorest outcomes. And this is going to be a theme that I bring out throughout this presentation around kind of the combination of risk factors. So Kirsty already highlighted the importance of the early years of life in terms of development of cognition, language, and senses. So focusing on this time point, colleagues and I conducted a systematic review of the literature to look at outcomes of HIV-exposed uninfected children. And we were interested in cognition, language, motor, and behavior. And we compiled all the studies to see whether HIV-exposed children were similar to unexposed, had poorer outcomes, or better outcomes. And this is the figure showing the results, but I know it's a busy figure, so please don't worry about looking at it, all the details. But essentially, it groups all the studies in age order. And what you can see from the colors is that some studies found no difference in outcomes. A number of studies found poorer outcomes, shown in red, in the HIV-exposed children, and then one or two had some improved, better outcomes. But when we looked at it as a whole, we could see that on balance, although there is a lack of consistency in the literature, over half of the studies found that children who are HIV exposed had poorer outcomes in at least one domain. And the differences may be attributed to different ages, populations, assessments, and quality. So we therefore conducted a meta-analysis where we took just those that we rated as the highest quality, so the largest studies with validated tools and looking at children exposed to HIV and mothers on triple ART therapy. And what we saw is that although cognition, receptive language, and fine motor skills were similar, which was reassuring, we see that children who are HIV exposed had significantly lower scores on expressive language development and gross motor development compared to unexposed children. And this is by the age of 2. And I want to highlight that these differences are on average across the population, and they're smaller than those of children living with HIV. But then again, at a population level, because of the high numbers of these children, this may be having a substantial effect. Now, we have to ask ourselves, that was at 2 years of age, is this continuing? And there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to see what's happening as these children age. But this is one study published in a recent special issue by JIS, highlighted here, and I would encourage you to read it. It's a really lovely special issue. And in it, we see this one study from Botswana showing that these children continue to have lower academic performance as they age. But what's interesting is there are also many other factors associated with neurocognitive development that Kirsty touched upon, but in this population are equally as important, including maternal education, household income, and interestingly, male sex, also associated with poorer outcomes. And this is another study from the special issue by Landon and Stanzi and co-authors. And this is interesting. I like the title. It's called Children of a Syndemic, Co-occurring and Mutually Reinforcing Adverse Child Health Exposures. And what you can see is that HIV-exposed children have higher odds of cognitive and motor delay. Separately, food insecurity is also associated with higher odds, but it's this combination that is actually substantially increasing the risk of developmental delay in this population. So then moving back to this figure, so thinking about what's underlying these differences in neurodevelopment, and this brings us to thinking about brain structure. And this is a figure showing kind of gray matter growth over the life course from birth to 100 years. And in this early period, there is this huge increase in brain growth, such that by 2 to 3 years, the brain is 80% of an adult. And this mirrors the development of neurocognitive function, as Kirsty highlighted. And therefore, thinking about what's happening with the brain structure is really important. And this is a study that colleagues and I did in the Drakenstein Child Health Study in Cape Town, where we looked at brain imaging of exposed and unexposed children. And you can see here in red is the exposed children, in blue the unexposed. And exposed children had significantly smaller total gray matter volume in the first weeks of life compared to unexposed. And this really highlights what Kirsty mentioned about this in utero developmental period being really important. By the time they're born, we already see these differences. But what was really interesting is when we looked at associating brain matter volume with maternal CD4 cell count in pregnancy, which is a marker of HIV disease severity, we see that the lowest volumes are associated with mothers with lower CD4 cell counts. And there's kind of this dose response association such that higher CD4 cell counts of mothers in pregnancy are associated with larger brain volumes of children. We then looked at subcortical brain structures, and what we found was that this region, the caudate, shown here in red, was also significantly smaller in HIV-exposed children. And a separate study done in Cape Town by Ibrahim et al. Also compared exposed and unexposed children, but they separated the exposed into those born to mothers who started art before pregnancy or during pregnancy. And you can see here in red is the unexposed, green is the exposed children born to mothers starting art pre-pregnancy, and blue starting art during pregnancy. And what we see very similar was we see smaller caudate volumes in the exposed children, and we also see smaller putamen volumes. And what's interesting is that particularly we see smaller volumes in those children who are exposed who started art during pregnancy versus before pregnancy. And they show some nice graphs showing that the association of increased art duration is associated with larger brain volumes. Similarly, increased viral load in pregnancy, so the converse, was associated also with poorer volumes. And so when we think about these structures, the caudate and putamen, this is very interesting because these structures are part of the basal ganglia. And this is shown here on this graph, the caudate and the putamen. And this area is a region particularly affected in HIV infection. So we're seeing some parallels with HIV infection here. And this is a region known to be important for motor, executive function, language, and behavior. So just taking a step back, what might be causing these differences both in the brain structure and the function? And I think what we've seen is through the brain, brain structural neuroimaging analyses, we see that there seems to be an HIV specific pathway such that maybe maternal HIV is associated with chronic inflammation and high viral load if they don't have suppression by art, and that may be causing poor outcomes. But also what we've seen from the neurocognitive literature is that it's the combination or augmentation of these universal risk factor pathways associated with the environment, poverty, and family factors that additionally may be causing poor outcomes in these children. And there's more work that needs to be done here. But this gives us a bit of food for thought around areas for prevention and intervention. And I just want to take us back to this package of risk factors. So what we've seen is that HIV exposure itself is associated with poor outcomes. And we need to be working ongoing to prevent HIV infection in mothers and particularly in young girls, as then we will prevent HIV exposure in the first place. But in those women living with HIV, early diagnosis, early ART initiation, and viral suppression is really important to improve outcomes of exposed children. And I just want to do one highlight again for children living with HIV, that this is also extremely important, this viral suppression, and we really need to be doing better in children living with HIV. And Amina very nicely highlighted the importance also of reducing stigma in this population. Then we need to optimize maternal ART, and we need to be understanding which drugs not only optimize maternal HIV, but also are best for child outcomes. Encouraging breastfeeding. And then thinking about these vulnerable groups, we saw the placental insufficiency in an earlier slide. So thinking about aspects of birth, low birth weight, prematurity, and that these children may be particularly vulnerable, and to just be aware of that. Thinking about co-infections, And then thinking about specific interventions that we can do for this population. And there's a nice study in Zimbabwe showing the combination of nutrition and water sanitation and hygiene interventions improved outcomes. And we heard a lot in IDPA about the importance of parenting and ECD interventions. And there's this package of care published recently by the WHO talking about managing HIV-exposed children and highlighting the importance of nurturing care. So responsive caregiving, promoting early learning, nutrition, and supporting maternal mental health. And there are many resources on this on UNICEF and WHO websites. But the idea that if we improve these outcomes for all children, we will also be improving the outcomes of exposed, uninfected children.
Thanks, Kirsty. I'm going to give you 1 minute to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up. Thank you. So just highlighting the importance of advocacy and engaging with mothers around child development is really important. And this is because this early child development impacts later outcomes. And what we can do is if we intervene early, we can work to improve the brain trajectories of these children. So just the conclusion is children with HIV exposure are at risk of early growth and neurodevelopmental impairment, with additionally brain differences in brain structure reported. And other factors are really important, HIV-specific factors, but also other universal risk factors. And by intervening early, we can optimize outcomes. I'd like to acknowledge many people who can help me on this path and contributed. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Lovely presentation. So what we'll do now is I've encouraged audience members to post questions in the chat or in the Q&A, but I'll allow 1 or 2 questions now before we move on to our other speaker, as that presentation is a little bit different. So if you want to, you can raise your hand, or I'll check in the chat box if there are any questions. Please unmute and speak. I see there's a hand up. I'm just trying to find Mphele. You can go ahead, Mphele. We can't hear you. Okay, in the meantime, there's a question from Leanne Randeri. How can we determine whether those poorer outcomes are due to HIV exposure versus social determinants? Catherine, I think this question's for you.
Thank you for that question. And I think it's an ongoing work to try and disentangle the causes. But I think that we can also step back and see that this group is at risk for poor outcomes. And that's kind of the first step to understand. And we can still do something about that by ensuring good monitoring, education, and acting early on any developmental delays. And I think the next question is what exactly is causing that? And that's what the ongoing research is trying to understand by ensuring studies that are high quality and have appropriate control groups that balance out these other factors. And that's what we're starting to see. But I do think it doesn't take away from the fact that we need to highlight this vulnerable population in itself. And it's all kind of part of the parcel of HIV exposure. I'm happy to talk more about specifics and studies as well.
Great, thanks very much, Catherine. Okay, so I think there's some discussion happening in the chat. Happy for Catherine and Kirsty to go ahead and respond to any further questions in the chat box or in the Q&A. We're now going to move on to Erica Conibear, who's an occupational therapist and the head of the Gauteng office of Shonaquip Enterprise, who's going to speak to us about the mobility needs for children with developmental disabilities in Africa. Erica, over to you.
Hi, good morning. I'm trying to share my video, but it's not allowing me to turn on the host. Oh, there we go. Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen.
Right.
Okay, so thank you for the invite to share today. I am representing Shonaquip Social Enterprise, and we have been asked to speak on the topic of innovations on the ground, mobility for children with developmental disabilities. So just a bit of background to Shonaquip. Just get to the next. Sorry, I'm trying to change my sorry, some technical difficulties. I'm not sure why it was. There we go. So just a bit of background on Shonaquip. Shonaquip was started by Shona MacDonald. 40 years ago, she had a daughter who had severe disabilities named Shelly or Mphele, and she was told by the doctor who was treating her to put her in a home. She wouldn't live long. She wouldn't have a good quality of life. Have another child and carry on with your life. And Shona at the time was, quite stubborn and quite offended by that. And she said, "This is my child, and I love her, and I want her to be a part of society and my family." But Shona at the time, she really found that as she started working with Shelly to try and get her to participate in family and community life, that until she was seated upright, she really couldn't engage with the world around her. So they started on a journey of manufacturing devices out of Shona's garage. You'll see in the second photo, when Shelly was 4 years old, this is her first power chair that they made in Shona's garage. And you can see 40 years later, Shelly is still in one of our Shonaquip devices. This photo was taken last year in her power chair. So that's the heart, the start and the heart behind Shonaquip. From humble beginnings in Shona's garage, as you can see in the pictures on the left, Shonaquip has grown to be a big, thriving organization. Even these photos are a bit outdated. We moved into a bigger office space, a bigger factory space this year, and our team is growing. We have over 80 employees in our head office in Cape Town. And I'm heading up our Joburg team, which has also grown rapidly in the last 3 years. We went from 1.5 to 6 next year. So we are getting bigger. We are one of the big suppliers in government tender for the last 20 years. So we are supplying devices all over the country. So I just want to pause for a second and speak about seating, because I'm aware a lot of people in the room may not be familiar with specialized wheelchair seating. So appropriate seating is a basic human right, and I think a lot of the themes in this conference has spoken about importance of early intervention. So seating not only enables mobility, but it also ensures that the body remains in a healthy position that prevents secondary complications such as scoliosis, hip dislocations, difficulties with breathing, difficulties with aspiration. So there's a whole bunch of body-related benefits to good seating. But then there's also a bunch of social benefits to appropriate seating, enabling someone to participate in their family, being able to join around the table at meal times, being able to leave the house and go out into the community, and be able to access education and work opportunities. So appropriate seating is really important and needs to start as early as possible for early intervention. I think one of the saddest parts of our job is seeing teenagers and adults who have not had appropriate seating throughout their lives, and having to now needing to accommodate for very severe deformities. So how are we doing in South Africa with the provision of appropriate assistive devices? Our organization has a parent network with over 1,000 parents who are involved in collecting data. So this is data collected through our organization, mostly by parents. And you can see this, it came from over 500 responses, so not the biggest sample, but we are still getting more information in. But shockingly, out of the responses to the question, does your child currently have all the devices they need to be safe and independent? And 72.7% said no. So that's the pie charts on your left, and the graph on your right just gives a breakdown of where these responses came from in provinces. A few came from outside of South Africa, but mostly from South Africa. So we still have a long way to go, and there's a lot of work to be done. So just to give a little bit of information about our solutions. So these are some of the devices we make. We have a modular seating design. Therefore, we believe that each individual, each child should be assessed according to their posture, support, and mobility and context needs. And after a child is assessed, then we prescribe a device that is appropriate. We have different options of wheelbases. We have different seating systems. We've got different headrests and different back systems. This is not all that we manufacture, that we have other devices as well. You're welcome to look on our website if you are wanting a bit more information about specific devices. But this is basically our design and approach to modular seating to ensure that devices fit the child's body, but also are suitable for the terrain. So just to speak a little bit more on what we do. So we obviously can't just provide a device in isolation. It needs to go hand in hand with training and equipping and ensuring that they are fitted appropriately. So yeah, so we design and we manufacture the devices, but we also roll out a bunch of CPD accredited training. We provide a lot of remote support to therapists outside of the provinces that we work, and also to therapists in other countries. We are passionate about maintenance and repair, so making sure that devices don't get discarded before they have reached their lifetime use. As I said earlier, we are one of the big providers on government tender, so we are providing to the Department of Health, Education, military. We've got a big project with the Department of Transport going at the moment. So we're excited to see some progress with the Department of Transport. We also have a strong relationship with Botswana and on their national tender. In Botswana, we also provide seating services alongside our devices. We've done work in Namibia, we've done work with International Red Cross. The list of other countries is quite a bit longer, but I'm going to move on for time's sake. We also are firm believers that devices should be of high quality. I think we are quite passionately against these cheap solutions that are developed in other countries and then kind of dumped in Africa as donations as part of some goodwill welfare that doesn't come with expertise and knowledge on appropriate seating. So our devices, we've worked really hard to get our ISO 13485 certification. I may be corrected, but I think we're the only company in Africa who has that level of ISO accreditation. Some of our other accreditations are listed on the slide. We also have an ISO wheelchair test laboratory. So basically we are able to test devices from other suppliers to ensure that they meet a certain quality standard. This is still in its infancy, and we hope to see it as more of a fully fledged organization in its own right in history in the future. We're working a lot on improving our exports because we are passionate about local manufacturing of devices, but we are well aware that many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa or Africa and as a whole do not have good quality local manufacturing ability. So we are trying to get our devices into a lot of other countries, and you can see a lot of the countries on the slide is where we are actively working, and you can find our devices in service. I just wanted to share 2 of my clients in 2 different contexts. So the first video that I'm going to play is actually in our Joburg office, and he's an active self-propeller who has spina bifida. This is when he just got his new chair. So you can see the device moving in a bit more of an urban context. And then the second video is another one of my clients. It was the first chair that he got, and his mom was really excited about it, and you can just see it moving along a little bit more on a rural terrain. So yeah, really taking into account the context we're working with in the design of our products to make sure that they are suitable for the South African context. So I just want to move a little bit beyond speaking about the devices. So as an organization, we are passionate about inclusion of people with disabilities. So you'll see in the little diagram on the top left-hand corner of your screen, we often see exclusion. People with disabilities are hidden away in their homes. They are not brought out of the back room. People don't know that they exist. They are not part of their family life or community life. And then sometimes we move a bit more towards segregation. You see a lot of care centers. I always a bit shocked when I drive to some of these care centers in Joburg. You're driving and you think that you have left Joburg because it doesn't look like Joburg anymore. And then you find this care center just so excluded from the rest of society that they've put a whole bunch of people with disabilities in one home, that you see that exclusion. And then integration is kind of those schools that have a class that have children with special needs in, but they are still they are part of the school, part of the mainstream school, but they are still in that class. But we really dream to see a place that is a country that is included, where people can participate on an equal basis with their peers. And I think that the photo that I've put on the slide just really is a beautiful picture of what that could look like, where we see children with disabilities in their communities, out in their streets, in mainstream schooling, in the shops, that they will be more seen and more heard and more a part of our society and have a voice in those spaces. So how we do that is Shonaquip is actually a social enterprise. So I've spoken a lot about our manufacturing facility, which falls under Shonaquip Pty, the company, which manufactures and provides posture support devices and specialized seating services. But Humble Foundation is our registered MPO, and that is a lot more work in the community. We've got a whole bunch of training programs that we're rolling out. We're passionate about. We've got a training program that looks at inclusive play and learning that we roll out at ECD centers. We do a lot of disability awareness training. Our Parent Champions is a registered trust. This is a group of parents that's housed on WhatsApp groups. We've got over 1,000 parents in the network, and they are actively collecting data. So that's a little bit of a bigger picture of the work that we do. We do this through promoting ecosystems for inclusion, which I'm not going to go into for detail with time's sake. And this is just a snapshot of the rollout of our work over the last financial year. You can see in the numbers that our seating services are definitely the highest numbers, but we are growing the other areas of our work and having an impact over our entire country and beyond our borders as well. So yeah, this is my final message. I hope that you will join us in building a more inclusive society for everyone, where we can see people with disabilities as part of our community and having a voice now in the important spaces. If you would like to connect with us, you're welcome to scan the QR code and just complete the form, and then we will get your details and we can respond to your request that way. And then the final slide just has my contact details. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks so much, Erica. It's a lovely presentation. So we'll open up the floor to questions. Post in your Q&A and chat. I was informed that some of the audience members are not aware that they are unsure whether they could unmute themselves. So if not, then please just post a question in the Q&A or the chat box. I'll then read it out live to the presenters, or they'll respond in the chat. Erica, it's amazing to see how Shonaquip has grown over the years. I remember meeting Shona probably over 20 years now, working as a young physio at Red Cross Hospital when things were just starting out. And just to see how not only the seating side of Shonaquip has grown, but also how you've branched into other areas of work that's required in our settings. Tell me, just reflecting on your work outside of South Africa, is the demand more for the seating support, or is it actually across the board? I mean, what kind of requests are you getting?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Definitely, the devices are the biggest demand. So needing, I think every time we present our devices to other African countries, just really seeing that, wow, we need these kind of devices in our context as well. We have had a bit of interest, particularly in like our parent network, and thinking a little bit about how other countries can kind of mirror that, and make sure that like it is designed in such a way that is contextually relevant. We have a growing interest in our inclusive play and learning program. It's called Indinogona. We got to share a little bit about that at the IDPA conference, and yeah, so lots of interest in that through IDPA, and yeah, but we haven't done a lot of rollout in services outside the country, beyond seating. A little bit of Indinogona, but yeah, not too much of the other areas.
Great. And you were talking, I'm just monitoring, there's some comments for you in the Q&A, so when you get a chance, you can have a look. It looks like, I'm just going to check quickly before I ask. Yeah, just some comments coming through, but maybe then a follow-up question, Erica. So given the work and the footprint of Shonaquip, and how it's growing in the years, I mean, what's the demand in terms of services? You were saying, we still have the situation where we're getting these large donations that are really not fit for purpose. Often it's adult chairs for children, that kind of thing happening. I mean, in terms of your support to government services within South Africa, I mean, what is that looking like? And what are the skills levels of therapists who are required to do the seating assessments currently? So what are the kind of gaps where we are now, and then a reflection of what we need to do to move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are many gaps. I think, trying to equip therapists to appropriately assess, appropriately prescribe, and then appropriately fit. So there are separate courses to what we offer, offered by Rehab Skills Lab, that run the basic, intermediate, and advanced level wheelchair seating. And we really encourage people to get involved in those. But obviously they are quite expensive, and government departments are not always paying for their staff to attend those. In terms of our commitment on in relation to our tender, I can offer product training for free. So we're able to go into hospitals and provide product training, and I often partner that with let me help you with some of your more intermediate and advanced level clients. But yeah, a lot of work to do in terms of training and appropriate, how to assess and prescribe appropriately. I think we also tailored our approach in other countries based on the skill set of the therapists in those countries. So for example, Botswana, we send a team. We send a team to assess and to prescribe and to fit. And we are slowly trying to capacitate their staff, but I think it's going to be quite a few years before they can independently do that work. We are currently working with Ethiopia, and we've taken on a bit more of a capacitating training model with a group of therapists organization that side, with the hope that in the long-term future that they would actually be able to do local assembly and local manufacturing and improve our design for their context. So depending on the country, we take different approaches.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Erica. That closes this part of the session. I'm going to hand over to Uta.
Yes, thank you very much. That was fantastic. So that is the first part of this child development session. So the second hour is to come. If you do want to get up and have a little stretch while we get into the next session, I just also, while you're doing that, please also remember the general AGM, the annual general meeting we have at 1 o'clock. We need you all there because this Child Health Association is really an association for the members. So there's things to discuss there. There's also elections. And as a bare minimum, we need, according to our constitution, we need 25 people there. So, but we would obviously want many more there. So if you are part of if you have registered for this conference, which you obviously have because you are listening to me, then you are a member for the next year of this association. And you are therefore eligible to attend and to give inputs and ask questions and to vote. So please, the 1 o'clock slot, you can have your lunch with you, but please join us so that we have a proper AGM. Yeah, so let's move on to our second part of this session. And this is, we're going to hand back to Wiedaad, who's now going to be a speaker. So the second session is on how do we actually now screen for developmental delays. And Wiedaad is going to start off this discussion, actually giving us an overview of how do we even attempt to screen for children with developmental disabilities at primary healthcare level, because it's, you know, if we want to intervene early, we need to also identify children that do require that intervention. So over to you, Wiedaad. Thank you very much. You are not yet in slide view, though.
Yeah, I'm sorry, having some trouble with my laptop, unfortunately, but I'm hoping I'm going to fix that. If I can just get rid of my video panel.
And remember, while Wiedaad is busy there, you can still interact with the speakers from the previous session on either the chat or the Q&A. They will watch the questions there and answer you. Yeah, that's looking good, Wiedaad. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thanks, Uta. So morning, everyone. So Kirsty's already talked a little bit about, you know, the need for screening or identification of children with developmental delays and difficulties. And some of our other speakers coming up after me are also going to be speaking about tools that we can use to not only screen, but to provide some monitoring or surveillance of children. I'm giving a much more contextual presentation, so looking at what are we currently doing in South Africa based on where our system's at. And so my presentation is not really going to cover the whole scope, but you will hear about other measures and other tools that we use for different purposes later on. So as you heard, and I think Kirsty included some of this in her presentation, you know, we tried to do some kind of assessment or child development evaluation, both at an individual level, but also for population level purposes. One, to detect children with developmental delays and disabilities, to either intervene at an individual level or to try and plan and understand the scale of the issue so that we can respond appropriately. So when we're thinking about the different ways in which we can do this, it's there are different modes. So I'm going to be speaking about what we currently have available in our system, which really is an approach to screening for child development difficulties through our Road to Health book. There are other ways of doing this. Dr. Mulaudzi is going to talk about monitoring or surveillance using the International Guide to Monitoring of Child Development. And then you'll also hear Dr. Vanessa Cavallera from the WHO talking to us about the global scales of early development, which currently are available, is being used for population level evaluation. But I think in future, the aim is that it will be used for individual level assessments as well, or identification. We have some capacity in South Africa around assessment. So how it works is that a child would be screened for any difficulties using the chart that's available in the Road to Health book. There are not, I'll show you an example of the chart later, but also there are red flags. And so if any of these things are identified either through administering the tool to the child and the caregiver in the consultation, or if the caregiver reports that there is a difficulty or concern. Those are the three ways in which a child is currently identified within our system, primarily using the Road to Health book as the tool or the vehicle for identification. We then would identify that child and refer on to services. There are a range of services or professionals or health workers who could be referred to, and I'll show you who they are in a minute. And they would then conduct further evaluation or assessment of that child. And that assessment could be in the form of a standardized assessment, but in most cases, it's usually a contextual, profession-specific or discipline-specific assessment. If the child then gets referred further onward to, say, a neurodevelopmental pediatrician, they may get a standardized assessment in the form of a Griffiths or others. And so there's a cascade or a care pathway that currently exists for children in South Africa. And we know that it's not reaching every child, and so it depends on where you live, whether you even identify to have a difficulty, whether you have the ability to refer a child onward for further assessment to any of the individuals I'm going to tell you about that's listed in our Road to Health book, and whether you have the availability of any pediatricians or neurodevelopmental pediatricians who are really like unicorns in South Africa, actually. It's these things that we hear about, and we've been very fortunate that we've had some of them on this call today. And so we do have capacity issues. We've got issues with resources, particularly human resources, to adequately provide support to children in our context. So ideally, what you'd want is to have some kind of monitoring system available. So in the likes of what Dr. Mphele is going to talk to us about through the GMCD or a similar process, where it's an interaction with usually some continuity, where you would have the same or similar individuals following up a child and that family over a period of time, where they'll have the time to have a conversation with the parents, to observe the child in context, where they're listening and attending to parents' concerns, and through these observations, make an assessment of the child in context. So not only what is happening with the child's development in terms of what they're observing or what the parent or the caregiver might be feeding back, but also to identify some other risk and protective factors around that child. And through that process, making a record or documenting the process and identifying whether there's any suspicion that the child may need another step in the process, which usually is screening or referral. And so what do we mean by screening? Screening, we apply in different contexts for different purposes. We all know about different types of screening that exist within our system currently for various different things. And generally, we institute screening programs based on criteria. And there's a set of criteria that's been developed by Wilson and Jungner in 1968 that's been revised over the years. And we still really use that to assess whether it's both ethical but also feasible to implement a screening program. And I talked about assessment, so I'm not going to go on to that. So who really are the people who would screen for these developmental delays or difficulties? Really, it should be happening at a primary healthcare level. And so our primary healthcare health professionals are really have an important role in detecting developmental difficulties and delays. And this includes, even in my view, the likes of a community health worker. It doesn't only have to be health professionals working in health facilities per se. However, there's a strong evidence base that supports the idea that parents or caregivers really are the main people that we should be listening to, as they know their children best, and probably if they feel uncomfortable or have concerns, it's true that there is something we should all be worried about. And so really we should be thinking about relying on caregiver report to parent report as far as possible, as well as being a key indicator of difficulty. And so you'll see in our tool in the Road to Health book currently, that is a singular measure that will require further discussion, but also potentially referral. And particularly in contexts where we know that the systems are weak and maybe not as responsive and capacitated as it should be to respond to difficulties. There are a number of contextual considerations for which tools or measures we use in context. And again, it all depends on, and we have so much variability in our system that, like I say, a lot of the tools that are being used across the numerous countries and different contexts do rely very heavily on caregiver concerns being a key indicator, that we don't really tend to use self-administered like questionnaire type checklists very often, unless it's in very particular contexts where that could work. But at the population level, we do tend to focus more on caregiver concern or parent concern or report, and also looking at tools that are quite easy to administer by primary healthcare workers, limiting the amount of testing items and testing equipment, etc., because we know that can be quite difficult in busy healthcare settings. So I'm just going to kind of flip through a few examples of tools or that are available. So the counseling aspects around care for child development really is not a screening tool. It's in some forms a monitoring tool, but it's very much a counseling and supportive tool. So being implemented into parenting programs, etc. But it's a way of, it's implemented in many countries by community health worker level type cadres of workers who go into households and see families and work with the parents or the caregiver and the child on problem solving around childcare and child development, providing support and encouraging the relational aspects of child development and nurturing care, and also sensitizes the caregivers to when there are any issues with the child, including health issues, and how to respond appropriately. This is the guide to monitoring child development that Prof. Mphele Mulaudzi will talk to you about soon. And this is just an example from the GMCD. And this is really used in a monitoring system. So it's a monitoring tool, not a screening tool. So let's just quickly reflect on what the global guidance is. So we've got the Nurturing Care Framework that came out in 2018, saying that, these are the components of care that are really important for children to be healthy, grow well, and develop optimally. And very recently, there's been a Nurturing Care Practice Guide that was published just this year. And in this practice guide, there's some guidance around what should be done to monitor or look for, identify children with developmental delays and difficulties. And it talks about screening, and it talks about looking at developmental monitoring as an approach. And so it says here, protocols for wild child care as a series of well-timed scheduled visits throughout the child's early years should include developmental monitoring, early detection of poor hearing or vision, and cognitive, motor, and behavioral difficulties, requiring referral for further evaluation or early intervention. We should also be equipping service providers to interview caregivers in order to identify the child's progress in learning and to solve any challenges they face. So, but there is a recognition that this is not always the case. And it also has a recommendation about the use of tools to screen children. And it says it depends on the strength of the health systems and referral networks to provide more specialized, indicated support for children identified with additional needs. Simply encouraging primary care providers to assess developmental stones is unlikely to be effective. And so it really emphasizes this need for having a system of support. And so from the point of monitoring and detection to in providing intervention and support, and making sure, and there's a lot of guidance around this, making sure that we encourage caregivers and mothers and parents to communicate early and often with the baby based on the science that Kirsty presented to us earlier, that we have to maximize and optimize every contact with health services, etc. And these materials actually came out after the revision of the Road to Health book in South Africa. So if we just quickly look, I've got 2 minutes, and I'll be done. If we just quickly look at the evolution of the Road to Health card in South Africa. So the old Road to Health card that existed, the kind of A4, two-sided A4 page, really had just these little icons on the chart saying that, you know, we should be looking at whether a child can walk, you know, before 18 months. We've got to make sure that they're sitting at around 9 months, etc. But really just visual icons, no guidance, just 4 pictures. That then evolved into a tool, a developmental screening tool that was introduced for the first time when we developed a Road to Health book. And at this stage, we had differentiated books because of the differentiated weight charts, growth charts. And then in 2016, we revised the Road to Health book to its current version. And now we talk about 5 pillars, which are really aligned to that nurturing care framework I showed you. And in that, we've got a pillar called Love, Play, and Talk. And the messaging, the guidance for caregivers aligns very well with the WHO materials. And for caregivers, there's a slightly more sophisticated version of that developmental screening tool. But the first question they have to ask is whether the caregiver has any concerns. And you can see it's even here as an additional category. And if a caregiver has a concern, that alone will require some referral for further investigation. It's not ideal. This tool is really, like I regard it, and many times I say it's a placeholder. It is a compromise, and it's something that we have to think about improving on when we do the next revision of the Road to Health book. I'm very glad that at Vanessa's presentation at the IDPA, she said that the move for the GSED is that eventually it will be used for individualized evaluation. And again, that might be an opportunity for us to introduce it into our child health tool. There's some guidance for health workers. There's referrals to a range of people. So if you've got any one of these levels of health workers available to you, you refer to them, because all of the people listed here have, to some extent, some developmental training and should be able to do a basic developmental assessment. If that's not the case, then we really have to look at, again, pre-service training and in-service support for our health professionals. And then obviously there's red flags where if you see any of this is also immediate attention. So like IMCI, red flag, you refer the child immediately for further follow-up. So at the moment, the tools that we have available is a screening tool. There's some level of parental concern, which we do regard very highly. We refer to a wide range of professionals, but the tool essentially is biased towards these levels, the indicated targeted support. It's not for the children who are just slightly lagging behind their peers. And so that very early identification of difficulty is not where this tool is based. And the compromise really is because the system is not ready. And so there's a lot of system building that we need to do. It's an ethical consideration, because as soon as we overwhelm our system with children who we now need to refer and provide support to, but we don't have the services and the people in place to do that, it obviously is not ethical to do that as well. So it really is a compromise. And so there's a lot of work for us to do moving forward. Thanks, Uta, that's me.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was fantastic. We are going to move on, but I wanted to alert the delegates that Wiedaad will need to leave in about 10 minutes time. So if you do have questions for her, please type in the chat and the Q&A or link up with her afterwards. So thank you, Wiedaad. We're going to move on, as already said, to Prof. Mphele Mulaudzi, who's the head of pediatrics and community pediatrician from Johannesburg, and she will be talking about the GMCD. So welcome, Mphele. Yes, I think we can see your slides. Yeah, that looks perfect. Thank you. I'm not hearing you though, if you are trying to speak.
Thank you very much, Ute.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Do I need to have a video?
It's okay. If you can, it's good. But if it's a problem, then that's okay.
Okay, let's try. If it gives me problem, then I would switch it off. Thank you very much, Uta, and the Child Health Priority Association for inviting me for this part of the session of childhood development, and in particular talking about the guide to monitor child development. And going forward, I'll be referring to it as a GMCD. It's really an honor to be part of this integral part, because child development is really an integral part of healthcare and for all children, irrespective of what conditions they present with, but also an integral part of promotion of development so that they can reach their full potential. So since I have short time, I'm going to try as much as hard to, it's not moving.
Yeah, we are still seeing your first slide.
Even me, I'm trying to get it to move there.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
So I would just try to share something about the origins and the research work behind the GMCD. I will talk about the GMCD package, and I will also just talk about two areas that when people talk about developmental tools and working in healthcare systems, things keeps on creeping up. And I would just share a few things on why the GMCD is not a screening tool and why the GMCD does not have scores. The initial research work was done in Turkey, where the initial GMCD was. And the standardization, that was in 2008, somewhere around there. But the standardization work of a GMCD, which became international, a multi-site study, multi-country, was in the period of 2011 to 2015, for which I was part of that multi-study country study. At that point, I was still at University of Pretoria, for which now I'm in University of Witwatersrand. I want to just take you a bit with it, because so you understand, even when we put the milestones that we've put in the GMCD, the initial part of the study actually dealt with what are the normal milestones expected for children. And we worked on that to actually, in the end, come to develop, to say that this milestone in all these countries, it's actually that they can be attained at a certain level, to actually put the milestone in the GMCD, in the fact that when we say somebody has not attained, we actually are talking about in the same language. We use the same language of the work that was done in developing the currently growth charts, to actually talk about the percentage, the Z scores and all that, to be able to say this group of children have attained this milestone at a certain age. What is also interesting for me as an African in particular, is that even in that work, we clearly show that as far as motor milestones, the African children were much better than the others, because the other was India, Argentina, and Turkey. And in my observation is that the West never changed their things according to anything, much of the things that comes out from the African work. They tend to question so many things, that even in the current one where they talk with the growth charts, and they had the motor milestone, we adjusted the period of for example, sitting to 4 to 8 months. So we can just adjust for the West, and the West cannot now say, if their children are less than 6 months and they are not like this, they are not actually developing properly. So this is something from my part to say that the milestones fit the type of patients that we actually see, and they were actually a normal group of patients. The GMCD is a package, and the package is really aimed at 0 to 3 years, although our GMCD, we actually worked beyond 3 years. We have better data for that group, because as we went at higher age, between 36 and 42 months, we didn't have a lot of patients, a lot of children. such that there are quite some things that we may not be comfortable recommending in that age group. But anyway, it's still a guide. The package actually deals with the issues of monitoring and supporting. And in that way, we talk about assessment of the development, where there are all those 7 domains that are there. And at the end of that assessment, you would be talking about whether the child is developing appropriately or not. And part of the package as well talk about nurturing care, assessing the developmental risk, and also plans of interventions, which are in the questions 1 to 10, which actually is very much in line with the nurturing care framework, which talks about we need to actually also, as we deal with nurturing, talking about caregivers' environment and also caregivers' mental health, which are in those questions of 8 and 10. And as the last component, we have a support, a GMCD support for development, which actually put a spread longitudinally of the expected growth for the children. The GMCD technique actually allows us to have an open-ended conversation. Many of the tools that are there on screening are very close-ended. And we allow then the caregiver to tell their story. And in that manner, we actually are strengthening the conversation, strengthening the communication, strengthening the rapport between the parents and the caregiver clinicians. And we also are interested much more on what the child is doing. So we don't go and say the child is 6 months. Okay, at 6 months you should be sitting, and we ask the question, are you sitting? We actually ask one question, whether you are at 3 months or you are at 6 months or you're 3 years old. And we're not talking about what the child is not doing. So because of the way we speak, it allows then the clinicians to then say, this is what the child is doing. In the plot, like you do with the growth chart, is developing appropriately. And then these are the areas. And we don't talk about child age, because you may find that in different domains, they are not actually at the same level. My computer is doing all sorts of things now. Okay, so I'm giving you just the example. So this is an example of one question, which is dealing with an expressive language. And it says, how does your child let you know when she wants something? And then we actually then get a advisor to actually ask them if they use the sounds, the gestures, words that the children are using to be able to, for the mom to know that the child wants something. And then you can see that on us, we would be able to see the mom could simply say any of those things, make sounds. This is not just say, ow, ow. Me as a clinician, I know that's vocalizing. Can also say the child laugh aloud. Can also say the child just say gaga, and whatever they do that. Or if the older you get, they are going to even say, no, they even tell me what needs to be done. So assuming at this age, you can see that I haven't really talked about the age, but when you then come with whatever has been said, and at the end of the conversation, you begin to say, at this age group, I'm expecting them to actually do that, and they are not doing that. Or even then, the next part of the support group will then bring you something to say, at this level, because milestones are progressive, irrespective of what age you are. If this is what this age, the child is doing, these are the recommended support that you can still start doing in that setting. So
sorry, two minutes, Mphele, please.
Excuse me?
2 minutes, please.
2 minutes, yes. So this is the support card, which you can see is domain, it's a domain, it's not age categorized, and it progressively tell you at these different stages what actually is expected. So it is not a screening tool, it is actually a guide. that monitors and supports child development. And it is usable across all levels of care and is used not only by nursing or doctor, but can be used by all healthcare workers, including community healthcare workers. And we have enough work to show in different levels and different countries and different people where they have worked. That's why it's not a screening. It's a guide, because it guides you. And what is the destination that you're guiding the caregiver to and the parents is a full developmental potential. The outcome of the assessment is actually in line with functional focus, not on a categorization of any sorts, like categorization of diagnosis, such that you can begin to do early intervention, which is in the part of the support card, while you're still working out what would be the diagnosis of the child. At the same time, it's not age dependent. And in that way, you could actually think about how the ICF even work and think about the growth chart. In the beginning, we weigh every child, irrespective of what age is, and only use the growth chart to actually tell you when there are challenges. And also in the first part of the package, include known risks that are there. It includes including assessment of what are the problems of the child, any chronic conditions, and what plans you have as far as early intervention it is. So I'm going to skip that. And why does it not have a score? The reason why it doesn't have a score in this line of work is that it isn't the score that is necessarily going to help me to do intervention. It is understanding that at this point, the child who is maybe 3 years, they are only able to sit, and actually even when they sit with support and the head is not, supported. That's what I need to actually be able to say I need to do an intervention. If I do a score, I have to go back to actually figure out where is it that is the problem. So I just wanted to put that to just say that it is as a tool, it has actually come up with a best rating as far as approaching what needs to happen as a matter of measuring tools in a routine health care setting. And if you read the initial nurturing care framework that they first released 2018, you would see that actually GMCD is the only tool that has been part of the reference of that, because it actually deals with all the areas of the nurturing framework.
Thank you. Just before the clock. Thank you very much, Mphele. If we're going to move on to Dr. Vanessa Cavallera from the WHO, she's the child neurologist and psychiatrist. And while Vanessa is loading her slides, and we hope you enjoyed South Africa last week, very welcome to our meeting, and thank you for joining us. And while you are getting ready, I'm just asking delegates to please ask your questions, continue to ask your questions in the chat and the Q&A. Thank you. Over to you, Vanessa.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yes, South Africa was really something I always love to come. So thanks for having us. And the IDPA, I think what Kirsty summarized this morning is a small part of the discussions. And just to say, it's been a really interesting conference. And I think one of the key things for me was really, the challenging of, the usual thoughts, and really the discussions were really rich and I think very inspiring. But thanks for giving me the opportunity to present about GSED. So you've seen this already from Kirsty, the first 2 slides, but I think this is important, especially for the Global Skills for Early Development is a package. So it's not one tool, it's a package of tools that really stem from the SDGs, the Nurturing Care Framework, and now the Global Report on Children with Developmental Disabilities, to try to fill some gaps in measurement. Because as we know, if there's no data, then how do we identify a problem and how do we request and demand action? So what the GSED package aims to do is actually to try to measure child development across all these levels of measurement. So looking at monitoring, population level, looking at programmatic, so impact evaluations and research. And now we're moving towards also identification of children, individual children with impairments. So what the GSED currently does, this has been launched in February 2023. And just to say that the GSED was created really from a huge data set, a data bank that used all the different tools that are usually or commonly being used from Bailey's, Griffiths, Mullen, you know, name one, I think we have most of them, looking at which are the questions, because, you know, if you look at these tools, questions are pretty overlapping. You know, there are different ways they're asked, they're combined in different sequences in different ways, but actually, you know, how many ways are there to ask if a child is able to walk or able to talk? So there's a lot of overlap, and we try to look at what are the questions and skills that are being measured that are truly global skills that try to capture the underlying capability of the child rather than, you know, the cultural expression of how things are done. So in a neutral, culturally neutral way that really works across countries. So the data set we had were from 31 countries, and most of them were low and middle income countries. And we really tried to extrapolate that and combine that with the conceptual framework of, you know, developmental science. So we know what children should be doing, how their brain develops, and bringing the empirical and the conceptual together really was the strength of developing this tool. So what we came up with is fully caregiver reported short form, which is an interview to the caregiver, and then a fully direct assessment tool, which is the long form. This was really meant to give flexibility to users. So depending on the use cases, you know, the type of requests that we get from as WHO are multiple and varied, right? So the needs of users differ, and what we are trying to do is try to have something that is available for each use case, but at the same time, that really speaks the same language. So I will get to that in a second, which is one of the, I think, key aspects about GSED. So the GSED, as I said, we have these two different forms. They can both be used for programmatic impact evaluations. The caregiver reported one obviously is best suited for very large scale data collection efforts. And they are paper-based, but ideally there's an app on which they can be through which they can be administered that optimizes really. It's really meant for optimization of data collection. So it has start and stop rules embedded within the app, and just the interface is very user-friendly. The short form has some images or animations that are shown to the caregiver when the question is asked, just to make the question very understandable and clear. And what we've heard from parents is that that is really, really helpful. And then the long form has this grid format that really helps the assessor if things are observed. As we know, you know, when you interact with a child, the child may do things not in a sequence, right? So you may observe things without the need to administer the actual item. So the grid format really allows for that flexibility to score and make the administration much easier and smoother. This is the app, which is ODK based. It's quite simple to use. The programming was not so simple, but now, you know, it's available and it's quite simple to use. And then the package includes, you know, a whole set of documents that are really meant for users. So there are item guides where there's a description of each of the items. For the caregiver reported part, they are really meant for training and especially for translation and adaptation, while the one for the long form is really meant as instructions on how to administer each of the items. We have user manuals that talk about the rules for administration, the setup, you know, some tips on how to interact with parents, with children. And then we have some cross-cutting documents about the translation and adaptation processes, which, I mean, the adaptation is very minimal because of the way the tool has been designed, but still we realize especially the example pieces of the questions need some adaptations to local context, the scoring guide, and then a technical report that just summarizes all the scientific background of how the tool was developed, how it was validated, and, you know, the results that we see. But I think one of the main things that I want to bring to your attention is the metrics. So as I said, we have a package of tools, but they all speak the same language. So you can measure at different levels of the health systems, but really on the same scale, which is one of the innovations of GSED, because it really allows, I think it really enables people that will look at the data or will look at the results to understand in a very simple language, similar to that of growth that is commonly used, right? So when you talk about centimeters or grams, everybody understands what you're talking about, you know, and a difference in grams and centimeters is very straightforward. So we came up with this D-score, which is the underlying unit for development, which speaks in the same way as growth does, which I think is one of the essential things, because we can measure as much as we want, but if the data that we generate and the scores that we generate are not understandable, then, you know, it's very difficult to drive action. So this is the beauty of GSED, and what this allows also, because we have this huge data set of different tools, we can actually translate scores from all these different tools onto the D-score scale. So then you can compare, you can understand, you know, what does the score on one tool mean over time or across different tools. One of the things, so far, GSED has been validated only for programmatic and population level data collection, but we're moving into individual level. And I think, you know, we need to be very careful when we talk about individual level, and the aspect of identifying a child with impairments or with that needs further support has a lot of implications, both on the health system, because obviously you need to refer the child and take charge of that child, which if it's a false positive, obviously, you know, ideally you're overburdening the system, which you don't want. And on the other hand, also the issue of underdiagnosis. So obviously, you know, false negatives, especially for the child that doesn't get services, then is an issue. But also, you know, the implications of telling a family that the child needs further support has a lot of implications. So we want to have measurement tools that are sensitive and specific. So GSED for individual level use is on its way. It's currently being tested in 3 countries. We're quite positive, you know, that the results will be sensitive and specific, and the diagnostic accuracy will be good enough for it to be used. But just to say that, you know, not yet, it's forthcoming. But we're happy to engage if people want to support, you know, this effort further. But the idea is really for this to be able to pick up children both with current challenges, but also at risk. So we want to be able also to prevent. So we're trying to look at whether an early assessment with GSED will predict later development of neurodevelopmental disabilities, and so allow us to intervene early. Just to put it out there, there's an adaptive testing version of the GSED currently for programmatic and population level that we will be testing also for individual level assessment, which really allows optimization of the number of questions that are asked to each child. So this is something very commonly used in education. You know, based on your response, you get the next question that will give you the most information. And so this allows us to really reduce the number of questions that are being asked, and therefore, you know, making the whole process of assessment much lighter on the data collector and on the parent and on the child, which I think is one of the main also challenges that we have. You know, we have not a lot of time to do these assessments, and also they're very burdensome and take a long time. So if we're able to optimize that, I think this will be a major contribution. And you've seen this slide from Kirsty before. We're also developing these curves, the same as for growth, for child development, so that we can really start pushing, you know, screening and monitoring of child development as a routine activity and not something that is done ad hoc. I think my time is up. I just want to say that, you know, there are tools that are appropriate for different types of assessments. So I think this for me is very important. The level of specificity and sensitivity that you need for the different types of assessment, depending on the purpose of your assessment, really it's important to choose the most appropriate tool. So we need to be very careful when we use tools. Sometimes, we have no better option, so we have to use what we have. But then, there's a lot of work going into the tool development that hopefully will fill some of the gaps and will enable to have better tools, better quality that will give us better data, because bad data will just make us do bad decisions. I had a few more slides, but I think I'll stop here and give the floor back.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for a fantastic overview. I think it makes it's really exciting to see that we are moving in this field in terms of how we actually standardize and how we measure and how we can do this at population level as well. So thank you very much. So again, questions to Vanessa in the chat, please, or in the Q&A. We are running out of time a bit because we've got one more speaker. So I'm not sure how much time we will have at the end for live questions. But yeah, so our next speaker is Bbosa. He's from CHI. He's the project manager for the assistive technology. And he will be talking to us about their work that they are doing. Taka, over to you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Prof. Feucht. Just switch on.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to bring up my slides.
Okay, we're also not seeing your video at the moment.
Okay.
Right. Yes, thank you. Over to you, except that we're not seeing your video, but for the rest is good.
Yeah, it's saying that the host has disabled my video. Yeah, so.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll be presenting on how the Clinton Health Access Initiative is supporting government on strengthening early disability screening as well as access to assistive technology. And this builds from the previous presenters who have talked about early identification, developmental screening, and we as CHI, through this project, are supporting or augmenting existing work that our different partners have been working on. So I'll just highlight a few statistics around access to assistive technology, and 2.5 billion people need assistive technology, but only and 1 billion people lack access of appropriate assistive technology. And out of that number, out of that 1 billion, 200 million are children. And assistive technology enables children to be included in different activities. Part of the activities include play or learning through play. So, as CHI, how are we planning to support government in strengthening early disability screening and access to assistive technology? So the first thing is ensuring that or supporting early screening and identification of children, both facility health facilities and in communities. The second aspect, obviously, after identifying and assessing these children, would like to link them to appropriate care, and ultimately, obviously, the children will receive appropriate assistive technology as well as supportive services. And the third aspect is around ensuring or creating an enabling environment that allows children using assistive technology to learn through play experiences. So I'll talk more about our plans, how we plan on achieving these three outcome areas, and how we plan on working with government and different partners on this. So on the first outcome area, we are currently working closely with the Department of Health, Department of Education, as well as other partners, looking at existing screening tools and see how we can strengthen them. I'm happy the previous speakers highlighted the implementation of the Road to Health booklet, which is a very comprehensive tool with a very useful developmental screening section that can be an entry point for us to identify children with impairments. Here also we are working with different partners, trying to capacitate our healthcare workers, capacitate our parents and caregivers, so that they'll be able to also identify. And I'm happy my previous speakers have also highlighted how parents and caregivers are at the center of identifying children with impairments. Here also, going to be working with government to find innovative ways in which we can scale up early identification interventions. I think previous speakers have also pointed out issue around staff shortages, and I think here as SHI, we're going to be looking at ways in which we can make use of innovative technology, either mobile-based screening tools, to ensure that we are able to increase to enhance effectiveness of the current screening platforms. And then looking at the second outcome area, which is around early access to assistive technology. I think it's important to identify, to assess children, but it won't be ethical anyway if we don't link children identified to appropriate care. And I think here, like we plan to work closely with government in communicating existing referral pathways for access to assistive technology. We know that anyway, in different provinces, service provision is fragmented and not coordinated. So I think it's important to clearly map out these referral pathways so that if a child is identified at PHC level, a child can then be referred for appropriate care and provision of appropriate assistive technology. Still on access to assistive technology, we're going to work closely with our partners in providing outreach services, as well as also capacitating therapists in providing outreach services. Again, we know it's a challenge within government, particularly in remote areas where there are no therapists stationed at different hospitals. So I think it's important for us, again, to find innovative ways to take the services to the children through outreach services. And here,
Sorry, 1 minute, please. No?
Sorry?
1 minute. Sorry, we need to wrap up.
Okay. And here we're going to be working with our partners who are one of our partners who is on the call, Shonaquip social enterprise. And then the last aspect is around enabling or creating an inclusive play environment. I think it's important also to sensitize parents and caregivers, capacitate them on how they can institute play experiences to children using assistive technology. So, and our project focuses in these 5 provinces, but we hope the coming years we'll be able to scale up and support all provinces. So this is the last slide, and I just wanted to highlight some of our partners who we are working with. Shonaquip Social Enterprise, they are on the call. They are our mobility implementing partner. HEARX Foundation, who are our hearing implementing partner, who we're going to be working with in implementing community-based sensory screening for children in ECD centers. Toy, going to be working closely with them on newborn hearing screening. And obviously we have our government partners, Department of Health and Department of Education. And I'll pause. Ute, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for that overview, and thank you for this really important project that you are embarking on with us as South Africans. And certainly from my own district, we have also realized how fragmented the services are, and there's lots of work to do to get that right. Often the components are actually there, but they are fragmented, and especially between Department of Health and Education and Social Development, we do need to make work that. Yeah, so we are almost on the hour. I wanted to ask Vanessa but I see you've answered one of the questions in the chat. There was one more question about where to download the GSED app. Vanessa, maybe you just want to quickly say something about that?
Yes, so we're in the process of scaling up GSED. So we released it, but there are a few things that we're still working on. The app will be available on Google Play very soon. In the meantime, I'll put my email in the chat. I can provide more details and access to the app directly.
Good, great, thank you. So that brings us to the end of this session. So Taka, sorry, there's now not time really for questions for you, but maybe you can put your contact details in the chat so that people can contact you directly if they do have questions or they want to engage with you or want to link up with you, seeing that you are going to work in several South African provinces. That would be great. Yeah, so this session was absolutely fantastic. I think it has highlighted the great need we have for thinking around children with special needs. And thank you for the really fantastic presentations from everybody. I want to hand over to, while I'm closing this part of the session, and we are on 11 o'clock, I want to hand over to Dave, who I'm sure he wants to give a plug for the AGM and then close the session. Thank you, Dave.